Analyzing Missing Migrants, Part 3, on a map. This dataset about missing migrants has one column called Location Coordinates. This contains the latitude-longitude coordinate pairs that we need to position each one of these events on a map. Here's what I'm imagining doing. I'm going to fork this visualization that shows cities on the map and modify it to show these events from the missing migrants dataset on the map instead of cities. I'll start by forking this map. I'll rename it to be called Missing Migrants on a Map. And the next step is to change the data that's loaded from cities to our migrant deaths dataset. I'm going to change this CSV URL to be the raw URL of the CSV file from our missing migrants dataset. So I'll copy this and then I'll paste it here as the CSV URL. Now we need to update our parsing logic. To get a sense of what we need to parse, I'm going to console.log data at index 0, the first row of this table. Oh, this gets me every time. Cannot read property 0 of undefined. I'm going to guard against data being undefined by saying data and data at index 0. If data is not defined, this statement will short circuit and will never evaluate this, and it will just return null, which is the initial value for data. But anyway, this is our first data object. We've got location coordinates as a string that contains both latitude and longitude separated by a comma. How do we deal with this? Well, we need to take this string and derive two different numbers from it, the latitude, longitude. And we need to use maybe that comma to split that string into two different strings and then parse each piece separately. In situations like this, I like to use the JavaScript console as sort of a laboratory. What I'm going to do is paste that string in the console so that I can manipulate it and try different things. JavaScript strings have a built-in method called split. And if we call split with a comma, it returns this array of two different strings. All right, step 1 accomplished. Step 2 is parsing these strings into numbers. After splitting it by comma, we can call .map and pass a callback that takes as input D one of these two strings. And let's try parsing it with unary plus. If we execute this code, we get two numbers back out. These are the latitude-longitude coordinates that we need to plot things on the map. Now we can take this logic and bring it back into our code. We already have this row function set up that parses each individual row. I'm going to get rid of this outdated logic that applies to the other dataset, and then I'll paste this new logic in here. And that logic needs to apply to d.something. I don't quite remember what that was, so I'm going to comment that out and then take a look again at this output statement. All right, the field was called location space coordinates. So we can say d at the string location coordinates dot split comma dot map, a parsing function, and we can take that output and assign it to, let's say, d dot coords, as in coordinates, and that all fits nicely on one line. Now, if we take a look at the output, we have a new property on each of our data elements, namely this array of two numbers, which happens to be the format that the D3Geo package works with. The next thing we need to do is parse this total, dead, and missing from a string into a number. To do that, we can say d at the string total, dead, and missing equals plus d at the string total, dead, and missing. And indeed, now that's parsed as a number. All right, now that everything is loaded and parsed, we're ready to plot it on the map. First, I'll get rid of this console.log statement. And I'm noticing this is called use cities, which is not really accurate anymore since we changed the data. So I think I'll rename this to be use data instead. And I can rename the file as well. And then over in index.js, we need to rename the import use data from use data. And then where we use that hook, we need to rename it as well. And then I'll rename cities to be data. And all the places where cities was used, we need to change to data. When we set up the size scale, we need to use data there as well. And I notice this is using a size value function that returns the population. We need to change this. We do have a field that would be quite appropriate to use for size, the total dead and missing number. I'll copy that, and over in index.js, we can use d at total dead and missing as the size value. It's not working, and I think that's because our marks component is expecting latitude, longitude to be a certain thing. Right, here it's expecting d.lng and d.lat, but we already have that as d.chords. It looks like there's some problem. Cities is not defined. Right, we need to change cities to data in here, and also when we unpack the props. And also over in index.js, we need to change cities here to data. All right, we got something. I don't know if that's right, though. This doesn't line up to anything. My hypothesis here is that we've got latitude and longitude reversed. So over in use data, when we set up these coordinates, I think we can just call .reverse on that array, which is a built-in function in JavaScript arrays that just reverses the order of the elements and returns the array with the new order. And look at that. That looks a lot better. Now it's lining up to various countries and coastlines. All right, this is amazing. This brings to light some very clear hotspots, like right here near Libya, on the coast of Turkey, and this area here south of Spain, and also the US-Mexico border. All right, that's how you can plot this migrant deaths data on a map. To recap, we changed use data to load in the CSV URL that points to the gist that contains our missing migrants dataset. We figured out how to parse that location coordinates field, which contains a string that has latitude and longitude comma separated. First, we split that string by the comma into an array that contains two strings. Then we parse each one of those strings into numbers and generate a new array that contains two numbers. And then we reverse that array to make it match up what D3Geo is expecting. We take that array of latitude and longitude and assign it to d.chords, short for coordinates, which we then use in marks.js, and we pass that into our map projection, which returns the pixel coordinates that we use for the center x and center y coordinates of the circles. We also parse the total dead and missing field from strings into numbers, and then we use that as our size value for the points on the map. This is the general process that you can go through to fork and modify this map to show any data that has latitude and longitude. That's all for analyzing missing migrants part 3 on a map.